Hey all, we're here for our next session. This is a What the Fuck joint event. We have Dan, Scott, and Amin here. They'll be doing a panel on red flags to watch for in DeFi and emergence of community standards. Can you guys intro yourselves?
Sure. So hi, everybody. I'm Dan Matthews. I'm the CTO of PyDAO and the founder of Audit DAO.
I'm Scott Lewis, co-founder of a startup called Concourse Open Community, and we created a DeFi Pulse and Dex AG.
Hi, I'm Amin Soleimani. I'm the CEO of SpankChain, Summoner of Moloch DAO, and help create Venture DAO, and working on Metacoin and Reflexer these days.
So we're going to kind of do a little discussion about risks and red flags in DeFi today. So what do you guys think the main pillars of risk are for the DeFi community?
I think there's three basic ones. There's sort of like risk that comes from centralization of projects, and sort of like how much trust you're putting in the project to either like with admin keys or not stealing your money, and sort of like versus how decentralized it is. The second one I think is the security risk. It's kind of the risk that the contract or the DApp like doesn't perform as it's intended to perform, whether that's through like a typo, not letting users withdraw money, or some other way that funds get frozen inside the contract. And then the third risk is I think is a third pillar of risk. I think it's important, is the economic risk of the DApp itself. And like even if the code is working correctly, that DApp may have like external dependencies on like liquidity in the market, or other inputs coming in the system. And if the market regime shifts and those things aren't available, or they aren't available as much as it needs to be, like for instance, the BZX hack, or the BX Expo WBTC, if the liquidity is not there, the DApp cannot function as intended, and users can lose money.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty much exactly right. One I might add is like platform risk, which is like Ethereum does something unexpected and you're building on top of it and you're sort of exposed to that. Maybe, you know, the Black Thursday like maker, like the keepers not being properly set up to participate in like the gas auctions when the gas prices was really high, causing people to get liquidated for pennies is like an example of that kind of, where it's like you knew how it was, it could have, it could have happened, but like it's also something that you have to program around because there's another risk. It's like sort of in between economic and security.
Yeah, or maybe program in a way that makes it easier for people to participate in the keeper auction.
Yeah, that would be ideal.
One potential solution.
What about standards? I mean, we're not seeing a whole lot emerging around community standards other than you should get an audit, like here's a new EIP. Do you guys think that matters? I mean, is that a problem?
So standards are hard, right? Because you only get standards like after you have a lot of like stuff to begin with. So like once people are doing it in 10 different ways, and then somebody gets frustrated and they're like, what is this? And then you either get a standard or you get like an 11th, way of doing things, which is not what you want. Auditors so far have seemed hesitant to trying to standardize. I haven't seen any auditors that have really like risen and been like, we need an auditing system for audits, right? We need to rank our audits in terms of how good they are, right? And because it sort of leaves people with many different expectations of what an audit means, right? If you're a community member, your average person's like, they got audited, like we're great, all systems go. But then, a power user might look at that audit and be like, it was only one guy. They spent 2 days. Like, that it's not even formally verified. Like, what is this? Right. So audits themselves range significantly in quality, and we haven't really found a good way of identifying that. And you sort of end up with this feedback loop that's like, based on the reputation of the firm. And so it's everything is fine until you mess something up. And then your reputation is tarnished, right? And
Sure.
so,
And Jonathan at Starkware brought up the thing that always comes up right in the chat there, XKCD 927, right? How do you merge existing standards versus creating a 15th standard to rule them all?
I think obviously, I think I've seen that XKCD, however you spell it, comic, about 1 billion times. But all of the things in my house, the plugs are all shaped the same way. So I know that doesn't happen.
Sure, but mine are different, over here in Estonia.
Well, yeah, but I don't make coffee in Estonia very often, so it's cool.
Good point.
But I guess my answer to that would be that I don't really care that much how the auditor thinks the best way to audit a code is. But what I do care about is I actually want to know what happened and what the results were and what the auditor actually thinks going out. And so I would like to see auditors standardizing kind of the metadata about the audits, specifically how much effort was put into this, sort of engineering hours. I'd also want to see whatever you want to call different bugs, call them whatever, but I like a bug count on and you see this already, the bug counts are in most audits for critical, high, medium, low. And then the other thing I'd like to see, which isn't in all audits, I'd like to see some, right now there's kind of coded insider language about what the auditor really feels. If they're sort of not super positive, that's a bad sign. But I'd sort of like to see that coded insider language turned into a more standardized, we're really confident, or we're sufficiently confident, or this is adequate-ish, or we're not that confident. And I'd sort of just see kind of these just standards, not about what the best way to do an audit is, but what the auditor did and what they think.
It was kind of like in the realm of disclosing what they found in the audit, right? There's a ton of disclosure problem in the industry as a whole, right? You look at LendFMe, was it disclosed adequately that it wasn't audited at all? Any number of new projects pop up and there's maybe a small warning right before you click the button that says, hey, use at your own risk. Is that good enough? Are we disclosing the risk of this to end users in a way that they can understand?
Maybe in some cases, right? Saying it hasn't been audited, saying that it's undergoing audit or something it's better than not putting it up.
Yeah, I would say if you've never gotten an audit, that should be on your website.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, most people understand that at this point in Ethereum, but I think it's a fairly large norm violation, and sort of are you really acting in a socially positive way for the community if you're hiding that from your users?
Because the audit reports, what they end up, the practical even if they're written for the company, you're okay, this company is a client, right? What ends up happening is the client, the company will publish it, and it's intended to get community support for something, and it's leveraging the reputation of the auditor. So you always have to be careful as the auditor, knowing that that's probably going to happen. So one audit that I didn't like was the Trail of Bits audit on Compound, because they didn't talk at all about the admin keys, whereas the Open Zeppelin guys, same code base, published a report as part of that, and they were by the way, they can upgrade it, and that means what it means. And I appreciated that a lot, because the defense from the Trail of Bits team was twofold. They said, one, well, they paid us to just audit the thing, it's not our job what they do, and sure, that's fair, but you have to know that you know, if they're leveraging your reputation, then it's like you're the one that I'm gonna, you know, be annoyed with if, you know, I later find out that there's something that there's some risk that you didn't inform me of, right?
Well, even when they do, like you take the other ERC 777 hack, right? Like the Uniswap, that was disclosed in the audit that's going to be a problem. And so that's sitting,
Uniswap, though, right?
What's that?
It was disclosed in the Uniswap audit?
That there was not reentrancy protection, yeah. So that was just kind of sitting there, known, but there was no disclosure on the front end detection of ERC 777's active discussion of that in the EIP. You know, when I kind of went back and looked, it looked like after, you know, the initial couple bits of conversation about that, it didn't get mentioned any further. And then you have a new token come out, you know, 6-7 months later, however long it was, and get listed, and you know, whose responsibility is that? Whose disclosure responsibility is that?
Yeah. Also, one other thing that, I mean, was
course, right, that lost all the money. You know, like why? I guess like my question is like, why not D4? Like, you know, it's like D-Force's fault that they listed the token itself and allowed it to be. So this is something I brought up to Robert from Compound. I was like asking him, this is another type of risk of a smart contract where it's like smart contract might system might work as you intend it and like have the right economic principles, but then it might be designed such that like one flaw can bring down, you know, the whole system, right? Where it's like only as strong as the weakest token that you list. And like Compound is today sort of that kind of system, because if you can inflate USDC, right, you can take out all the money in Compound. If you can inflate DAI, you can take out all the money in Compound. And because you use it as borrowing power, use it as collateral to borrow everything else. And that's what they did with you know, the token, the 777 one, right? They kept increasing their amount so that they could borrow all the rest of the money. It's like, yeah, I think that's like their fault for not knowing how their own system worked. Right? It's not Uniswap has like some role in that too, but like it wasn't Uniswap's money at risk, right?
Well, I think Dan might be referring to the PBTC pool that got drained like a couple of days before, right?
No, so I'm referring just to the idea of ERC 777s being included in Uniswap at all, right? So it's a known risk, it's a known problem. It's not undocumented, but it's not exposed in a way that, you know, people who are maybe even creating the pool know that this is something that they need to be aware of. So, you know, how do you? I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that that should be entirely on Uniswap. I also don't think it's fair to say it should be entirely on the creator of a token. So how, you know, you can't expect a token creator to know every single protocol in the industry, although Uniswap is a pretty well-known protocol, but you can't expect them to know what's going to happen when their token is introduced into every platform that it could be introduced into.
Well, you can't know. Like you can expect them today to know that it's not going to work on Uniswap, right? It just took like now everybody.
Yeah, that's correct. We're talking about IMBTC.
Yeah.
So AJ asks, what do you guys really think of security audits? Do they tend to be watered down because they're being paid to perform the audit? You know, I don't think that. I can only speak from my own experience at Market Protocol and also PyDAO. I don't think our audits were watered down. They were actually quite thorough and allowed us to address issues that needed to be addressed. I do think that there doesn't tend to be a follow-up from the auditors. Some of them do have longer running contracts with different teams, but not all of them. Sorry, that Slack chat is getting a little nuts there. Not not all of them do that, and indeed, there's probably not enough audit firms out there to do that with every project, right? Like you couldn't expect all of these teams to sit there and be with all of these projects forever. So I do think there's something missing.
Yeah. Yeah, like a scalable layer to check for new bugs in old contracts as new bugs are discovered.
That could be part of it. I think also, you know, you're creating the registry, right? So some sort of rating, you know, could be part of it. That kind of supplements audit and maybe gets updated over time.
Yeah, a couple things. We kind of got a little cul-de-sac there. Yeah, so I think the question about like the conflict of interest, I think it's almost that like you have to pay an auditor a lot more money not to be watered down. And like the more you pay, the more attention you get because the more time they spend on your thing. But yeah, I think there's currently sort of like audits are judged sort of by the like social reputation or maybe academic reputation or technical reputation of the auditing firm, and like what determines those reputations may be somewhat correlated but not always correlated to like what actually makes a good auditor. And I think there is probably a large room for like some sort of kind of quantitative look at quality, but I don't know. It's still, I feel like it's still fairly new, a new space, and there's technical reputation is a very good way to bootstrap because it's going to be correlated to the quality of the auditing, even if you don't have much data. So I don't know. Kind of a tricky problem right now, but one I would love if someone solved.
Well, maybe I think the CEO of TrailBits is following us, right? So maybe he'll have some ideas. So Amin, I know you have some opinions on this. Like how do you protect against risk and red flags and code quality? Are teams shipping too fast? Are they not thinking through what they're releasing enough? Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, when you approach Solidity development like smart contract development, it's not like normal web development, right? You get a bug in your like website, it crashes, you change it, you reboot the server, you know, it's fine. When you get a bug in your smart contract, you lose like, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and everyone hates you forever, right? That's like very, very different risks. So you end up like taking security as their sort of guiding principle throughout the entire smart contract development process, right? From the very first day, you're like, how do I make this as secure as possible, right? And the way you end up doing that is making stuff as simple as possible. So like one of the big red flags is like if something is like over-engineered and not the people who are building it aren't trying to simplify it, because every complexity, every interaction, every every additional feature that the system has is something that needs to be tested by the developers, and then those tests need to be reviewed by other people, and then the whole code and the whole mental model around what it's supposed to do needs to then be turned into an audit and understood, and then like that needs to get community like people to look at it and review it themselves too, sort of like independent audits, and really all of that is a factor of the complexity. Right. So the more complex it is, the higher the cost on all of that. For me, for like Moloch DAO, 400 lines of code, we're trying to do it dead simple. The audit was essentially free because it took like, two guys a couple days, but it only did that because the code is simple and we'd already tested the shit out of it. And so if you don't approach it that way, then you risk either never finishing or not having enough money to pay for the auditors because your audit report would be too expensive because your system's too complex. And so then they might, introduces some risk that they might miss something. Or yeah, it's like, you don't get an audit at all and then your system breaks. So yeah, it's like super important to think about complexity, and like just what that means in practice is like somebody says, oh, I have a cool idea for blah as a feature, and then you're like, that's a great idea, we're gonna not do that. Just gonna pretend like I never even heard you say that and move on with my life. And that's like good design philosophy to have when you're designing some of these smart contract systems. So I like Compound's new governance stuff because they tried to keep it pretty simple. I think that's like, good philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm seeing a lot is teams will get an audit, they'll launch, and then they have upgradable contracts. They want to add one small feature. Upgradable. Okay, push it out. No other audit, no check, and all of a sudden you have a couple of different things that have been added to your code base, and no one's reviewed it.
So you got to be real careful with upgradable stuff, because one, like the upgrade mechanism itself ends up being potentially the most complex part of your code, and therefore the most risk that it faces and has the most time you need to spend testing and evaluating. And then like if you every single update you need to make also then needs to be audited in some sense, because it's a new thing. And so you're like, the trade-off is between, so like Compound in theory could have not had upgrades possible, right, to their code. They just ship their V1 and then they ship their V2 as a completely separate contract, force everybody to withdraw, and then move into the new one. And that's sort of what Moloch DAO did. There's no upgrade mechanism. The upgrade is everybody can rage quit whenever they want, pull out their money, deploy another contract, and join that one. Yay, we upgraded. The trade-off is the coordination cost, right? It's the accumulated cost of everybody's time and effort in like pushing these buttons and like moving their money out of the system and into the new one. And so if you're trying to iterate quickly, and provide new features and capabilities, and then like it makes sense to have that upgrade stuff built in so that you can provide this as a service to everybody and save them all the time, especially if some of those people might not come back, right? So I get why people do it. It just means you have to be very careful, and that as a user of the system, you have to like place a lot more trust in them to manage the upgrade process correctly.
For sure. I feel like I should highlight this too. I almost think that Jonathan from Starkware should be on this panel with us the way he's chatting today. But yeah, don't push your code out before you go away for the weekend. In case anyone here is developing and doesn't know that one from the past, 4 p.m. on Friday is not the time to deploy.
Yeah,
it's a good note.
Push some update on Christmas Eve once. I spent like all Christmas doing customer support. That was like worst.
Worst Christmas ever. Yeah. So okay. So for admin keys, how do you decide what the right amount of project's power is over the contracts?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you're talking about with admin keys, right? So I think when it's ideally, 3 guys on a multi-sig or 1 guy with a MetaMask key, that's a real big problem, right? Like even if they do everything right, even if their intentions are great, what's their OPSEC like? Are they gonna be hit by a $5 wrench attack? Is someone going to show up and take over your money just because they have the ability to dox that person and figure out where they're keeping the key? That's a problem. At PyDAO, we took the approach of handing it off to a DAO. So we figure that there's a balance to be struck. Admin functionalities can provide a safety layer, but only if they're used right. So if you can disable functionality very, very quickly, if you can enable security mechanisms very, very quickly, but it takes time and a large governance vote to re-enable them, then you have a circuit breaker. You have that safety. You don't have the risk that comes from the OPSEC of a single person or two people. But you do get the benefits of that admin functionality. So I think like the same thing with the proxy contracts, right? Like they can be very useful. They can also be very dangerous. So it's all about how you implement them and how you approach using those very powerful tools.
All right, so question from Jonathan. Automated audits. Will Ethereum ever get to a place where automated audits are good enough to use as audits?
Well, I mean, theoretically, MythX could do that type of thing, right? Is it possible? I mean, I think a lot of these tools are already there. They're probably proprietary or cost a lot of money to use at scale. And that might be a problem that we want to think about as an industry.
I haven't seen any that have worked for me. Springchain had some payment channel contract that we got hacked, lost $40,000, and I was this is like SF Blockchain Week 2018. I was like sitting on a panel and I'm typing up like my blog post of like, hey, shit, we got hacked, like while I'm on the panel. And I think somebody on the panel was like, I wrote an automated, thing, it'll detect the bug. And then I ran my code through it and it didn't. I was like, okay, well.
Yeah, it seems like a big task to make something that will detect all the bugs.
Yeah, that was like re-entrancy too. So.
Gotcha. I mean, with all this composability, can we actually make any of this stuff safe? I mean, is it even possible? Like, you could have the best code in the world, but someone introduces something like flash loans tomorrow, and as a dev, as a team, you didn't even think of that as a possibility.
I think it's like, you really got to be defensive when you design this stuff, right? So like, the admin key stuff that you were bringing up, that's like a good point. You could have an admin key that can do anything, and then it introduces a whole bunch of risk. But if it can only freeze the system, like that's acceptable, right? You've bounded the attack vectors, and similarly, for like Moloch V2, for example, making the decision to add multiple ERC20 tokens. Basically, the thing you're thinking about the entire time is like, how are these ERC20s going to fuck me, right? Like one of them is going to do something and it's just going to blow up the whole thing, and it's like, so you end up designing it so that like, if you can, you can think about the total amount of damage one of those can do. And like in Moloch V2, for example, it's just like, you can only, if one of them has like an overflow or something, then thanks for whole. If one of those has an overflow bug, it'll only affect the balances of that token, right? And so like, I know Compound saw a question there. They don't per asset debt ceiling yet, right? But one of the things that they could do, and I think they plan to do to protect their system, is add this per asset debt ceiling. To their credit, what they do currently have is like Wrap Bitcoin, for example, has a debt ceiling of essentially 0. You cannot use it to withdraw anything, although you can like lend and borrow it. And that's there because, BitCo is a custodian. They don't necessarily trust that they won't wipe out all the money. And so, they said no. If they added like per asset debt ceiling, that would prevent the system from failing completely if one of the tokens failed, which is good.
Well, thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun talking to you about this stuff. I hope we continue to do better and understand the risk of all this shit we're creating.
Yeah. Thanks, Amin and Dan.
Go back to the pen testing.
All right. Thanks, guys. We're going to transition to the next session now.